In the corridors of Westminster, tension buzzes like an exposed wire. The air is thick with murmurs of betrayal, whispered rebellions, and an unsettling question: is Keir Starmer already losing control of his premiership, barely a year after his historic election win? Across Britain, disillusionment is brewing. The promises of hope and change that swept Starmer into Downing Street now feel like faded slogans. What's left in their place is a government staggering under the weight of broken pledges, unconvincing U-turns, and a Prime Minister who many now suspect lacks the strength to lead. And nowhere is that more evident than in the welfare reform storm that has rocked the Labour Party to its core. Hey there! Did you know that over 95% of our viewers haven't subscribed yet? We totally understand, life moves fast, and it's easy to miss that one little button. But here's the truth: subscribing is 100% free, and it means the world to us. It helps us keep digging deeper, telling the stories that matter, and holding those in power to account. So if you've made it this far, why not take 1 second and hit that subscribe button? Join our growing community, and never miss the news they don't want you to see. Thanks for being here. You make this possible. It began with a bill, seemingly modest in scope, but one that quickly ignited political warfare. Sir Keir Starmer's plan to reform disability and health-related welfare spending was framed as a step toward fiscal responsibility. But critics, both inside and outside his party, saw something far more troubling. The Conservatives, led by Kemi Badenoch, declared their opposition loud and clear. The welfare budget is out of control, she thundered, noting how spending on health and disability benefits had ballooned from £40 billion pre-COVID to a projected £100 billion by 2030. Labour's reforms, she said, were not nearly enough. Badenoch threw down the gauntlet, cut the welfare budget meaningfully, introduce serious back-to-work measures, and pledge no new taxes to fill the fiscal gap. Starmer's government, she argued, had failed on all 3 counts. We have a government that is incapable of governing, she added, announcing that the Tories would vote against the bill. The line had been drawn. But Starmer's real problem wasn't across the aisle, it was behind him. No less than 126 Labour backbenchers signed an amendment that would have blocked the Universal Credit and Personal Independence Payment Bill at its first vote. In response, Starmer blinked. Concessions were made. Reforms to the personal independence payment would only apply to new claims starting in November 2026. Cuts to the health-related element of universal credit were scaled back, with existing recipients guaranteed protection in real terms. But it wasn't enough. The rebellion was already in motion. Some MPs saw the U-turns not as leadership but as weakness. For many, this wasn't just about welfare, it was about a pattern. Starmer has gained a reputation for backing down under pressure. Winter fuel allowances for the elderly? U-turned. The personal independence payment reforms? Watered down. A national inquiry into grooming gangs? Only announced after pressure from Baroness Louise Casey. Most embarrassing of all was his reversal on the infamous Island of Strangers speech. After left-wing backlash compared his rhetoric to that of Enoch Powell, Starmer issued an apology, claiming he and his speechwriters were unaware of the implications. But critics were unconvinced. These islands, they argued, are becoming an island of strangers. And acknowledging that isn't racist, it's reality. Britain's demographic transformation has been staggering. Once marked by a stable identity, the post-2004 EU expansion and Brexit-era migration waves brought rapid change. Communities in northern England, especially white British and socially conservative Muslim neighbourhoods, often coexist without real integration. These pockets of division, religious, ethnic, educational, have become breeding grounds for political volatility. Reform UK and pro-Palestine independents are rising in the polls, and Labour's grasp is slipping. Enter Andy Burnham, the so-called King of the North. As Greater Manchester's mayor, he holds no common seat, yet his voice carries weight. And this week, he used it to directly undermine Starmer. Calling on Labour MPs to reject the PM's welfare concessions, Burnham aligned himself with fellow Labour heavyweight Sadiq Khan. Both mayors have publicly challenged Starmer's authority, and many believe they're positioning themselves for a future leadership bid. Khan insists he's not interested in replacing Starmer, but Burnham has never ruled it out. When running for his third mayoral term, he hinted heavily, "I'm not going to say that I'm going to rule it out. I feel I know a lot of the changes the country needs." For Burnham to challenge Starmer, he'd need a common seat, and fast. His term as mayor ends in 2028, conveniently just ahead of the next general election. Labour's National Executive Committee controls candidate selection for by-elections, and Starmer's inner circle could block Burnham. But should Starmer fall, or step down, all bets are off. And the PM's recent statements sound more like excuses than strategy. When pressed on the welfare cuts, Starmer told the Sunday Times he was distracted by world events, namely, the Middle East crisis. This, he said, was context, not excuse. But critics were quick to pounce. How could a prime minister be too distracted to manage a cornerstone of domestic policy? Starmer's remorse over the island of strangers line added fuel to the fire. "I should have read the speech more carefully," he admitted. The impression left was of a leader adrift. His mishandling of the winter fuel payment debacle, another U-turn, confirmed the perception that he doesn't understand political timing. And now, the wolves are circling. Within Labour, many suspect Burnham is encouraging rebellion precisely because he senses weakness. As Starmer continues to fold under pressure, the path opens for Burnham to build momentum. With Labour's poll ratings faltering and trust in leadership eroding, the idea of a clean break from Starmer is gaining traction. Burnham, younger, experienced, and distant from the chaos in Westminster, suddenly seems like the only credible alternative. And then there's Wes Streeting. Once seen as Starmer's heir apparent, Streeting has stagnated. Groomed to take over if Labour lost in 2024, his momentum vanished when Boris Johnson's implosion handed Starmer the keys to number 10. If Streeting can't deliver on NHS reform, and Labour support continues to slide, his star could fade. But Burnham? He has governed. He has won elections. And crucially, he has stayed clean. Then came the Palestinian refugee controversy. 67 MPs and Lords, 35 of them Labour, signed a letter demanding a Ukraine-style visa scheme for Gazans. Among them were well-known names, Marsha de Cordova, Clive Lewis, Stella Creasy, Richard Bergen. They urged Starmer to act quickly, warning that Palestinians with family in the UK needed urgent protection. But critics warned of immense security risks. Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp pointed out that neighbouring Arab nations had refused to accept Gazans. Why should the UK? He reminded the public of the crowds who cheered Hamas's October 7 atrocities. How, he asked, could Britain distinguish between genuine refugees and Hamas supporters? Military intelligence expert Philip Ingram added that such a scheme would be impossible to vet. With Hamas embedded in the civilian population, any mass resettlement plan could be a disaster in disguise. Even women and children were not immune to suspicion. Ingram referenced Shamima Begum as evidence that radicalization knows no gender. And then there were the practicalities: no British consulate in Gaza. No safe routes out. No cooperation from regional powers. The plan, Ingram said bluntly, was unworkable. But pressure continued to mount. In February, a British judge granted a Palestinian family the right to settle in the UK by creatively invoking the Ukraine refugee scheme and human rights law. For Starmer, already besieged by rebellions, the issue has become a powder keg. It was supposed to be the start of something new. A year into Sir Keir Starmer's premiership, the promise of better living standards and bold reform echoed through Downing Street. But in just a few short months, the curtain is being pulled back to reveal a government in chaos, policies in retreat, and a prime minister dangerously close to losing control. On the surface, Labour's proposed welfare reforms under Sir Keir Starmer were meant to restore fiscal responsibility, get Britain back to work, and demonstrate a pragmatic vision of governance. But beneath that carefully polished message lies a dramatic unravelling of political control. Chancellor Rachel Reeves is now reportedly poised to announce a controversial cut to the tax-free cash ISA allowance, reducing the annual cap below £20,000 in her Mansion House speech. The move has already stoked fury among savers and experts alike, who warn this will discourage long-term saving and shift people into riskier investments. According to industry insiders, city bosses have pushed for this cap to drop as low as £4,000, a stark betrayal of middle-class savers Labour promised to protect. While Rees insists the overall ISA contribution will remain untouched, insiders confirm that negotiations are ongoing. Why? Because Labour wants to push Britons into the stock market, a gamble critics say reeks of desperation to prop up economic activity amid growing fiscal strain. This economic tension is no longer theoretical. The Office for National Statistics, ONS, confirmed that British families' disposable income has fallen for the first time in nearly 2 years, a damning indictment of Starmer's promise to raise living standards. Real disposable income per person dropped by 1% in Q1 of 2025, reversing a 1.8% gain from late 2024. For families, it means tighter budgets, tougher choices, and a clear betrayal of the government's so-called economic plan. While GDP per head grew modestly at 0.6%, it's little comfort for households losing their purchasing power. The government's metric for economic progress has turned into a political liability. Meanwhile, economists are sounding the alarm, inflation remains stubbornly high, wage growth is slowing, and tax hikes may be inevitable. The true storm, however, erupted over the highly divisive welfare reform bill. Sir Keir Starmer, battered by internal rebellion and public skepticism, has found himself cornered by his own party. At the heart of the battle are proposed cuts to health and disability benefits. Originally, Labour wanted to tighten eligibility for personal independence payments, PIP, and reduce the health-related component of universal credit. But a rebellion of 126 Labour MPs, yes, over a third of the parliamentary party, forced major concessions. Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall confirmed that changes to PIP would only affect new claimants starting in November 2026. Existing beneficiaries would retain their payments in real terms. Yet, many backbenchers remained unsatisfied, arguing that the changes still went too far and would hurt society's most vulnerable. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party, now led by Kemi Badenoch, smelled blood in the water. In a calculated blow, Badenoch declared her party would vote against the bill, calling Labour's reforms not serious. She lambasted Starmer for failing to meet the Tories' 3 conditions: no tax hikes, reduced welfare spending, and higher employment. "We have a government that is incapable of governing," she said bluntly. What Labour is doing is not reform. It's retreat. But it wasn't just the opposition lining up against Starmer. Labour's most powerful mayors, Andy Burnham and Sadiq Khan, broke ranks and urged MPs to vote the bill down. Burnham, in particular, has been vocal about his readiness to challenge Starmer's leadership, potentially setting up a leadership bid if the Prime Minister's authority crumbles further. Amid this chaos, Shadow Secretary Danny Kruger joined the chorus of criticism, warning that the government's watered-down welfare bill destroys jobs and betrays the sick. He argued that Labour has failed to deliver meaningful reform and instead given in to political pressure, showcasing their inability to govern decisively. Starmer, now scrambling for a face-saving deal, is reportedly preparing more concessions to appease rebels before the vote. Yet, insiders fear it won't be enough. The bill is on the brink of collapse, and with it, so too may be Starmer's credibility. The once hopeful premiership is now fighting for survival, teetering under the weight of broken promises, political missteps, and internal mutiny. While Nigel Farage celebrates a series of local election victories, the political landscape of Britain is shifting dramatically. Reform UK is no longer just a protest party, it has become a powerful political force, reshaping the electoral map and putting traditional parties on the defensive. Reform UK's victories in 3 key by-elections, Basildon, Rossendale, and Sheffield, signalled more than just local momentum. With Sarah Jane Shields elected in Wickford Park, Mackenzie Lee Ritson in Whitworth, and John Booker in Stocksbridge and Upper Don, Farage's movement made a statement: the disillusioned British electorate is mobilising. Critics were quick to downplay the significance. Some on social media mocked, 3 local councillors, wow, what outstanding success. Others pointed to low turnout. Yet supporters saw the truth behind the numbers: Reform's message is resonating. Since the last general election, Reform UK's momentum has been undeniable. With over 14% of the national vote, the party outpaced the Liberal Democrats by nearly 500,000 votes. 5 seats were secured in Parliament, including a personal victory for Farage in Clecton. And the momentum hasn't stopped. According to the BBC, Reform's membership has quadrupled over the past year. The party's rise has become more than a blip, it's a movement. Keen to broaden Reform's appeal, Farage has distanced himself from far-right figures like Tommy Robinson and offered careful, if controversial, praise of influencers like Andrew Tate. "I can see why he's doing well," Farage told The Times. "If young men didn't have us to speak for them, wait until you see what comes next." This populist, anti-establishment but not extreme rhetoric has widened Reform's reach, especially among disaffected working-class and middle-class voters. Even outside politics, Farage is earning unexpected praise. Just before his Glastonbury performance, Sir Rod Stewart publicly backed Farage, criticising Labour's Keir Starmer for his Brexit policy and declaring, "We're fed up with the Tories. We've got to give Farage a chance." When a cultural icon like Rod Stewart offers public support, it signals a shift not just in politics, but in perception. This comes at a moment of significant vulnerability for Labour. Despite entering office on a wave of promises, Starmer has already faced multiple U-turns, particularly on welfare reforms and immigration. His "island of strangers" remark forced a public apology, and pressure from Labour backbenchers continues to erode his authority. Critics accuse him of being a political chameleon, a Corbynista to win the leadership, then a Union man, then a Blairite. The result? A leader perceived to stand for nothing. Before the general election, mainstream media largely avoided pressing Starmer on his policies. The focus was almost entirely on dismantling the Conservatives. As a result, Labour's agenda went unscrutinised, and now the public is waking up to the consequences. Tax rises under Chancellor Rachel Reeves, including VAT on private schools, have sparked outrage. Wealthy Britons are leaving the country in record numbers. Every 45 minutes, a millionaire departs, taking with them investment, jobs, and tax revenue. Labour's focus on socio-economic duties within the Equality Act has triggered fears of state-driven class warfare. The policy, introduced by Bridget Phillipson, aims to extend equality protections to include social class, a move critics call a direct attack on Britain's hard-working middle class. Many now view these reforms as more than economic, they see them as social engineering. Combine that with rising taxes and falling disposable income, and you have a ticking political time bomb. Farage's 5 Reform MPs have already taken their first steps towards parliamentary collaboration with the Conservatives. Their support for Robert Jenrick's amendment to force the government to disclose the nationality of convicted criminals has been hailed as a landmark moment. This law, if passed, would require the Home Office to reveal the legal status and nationality of every criminal convicted in the UK. The data, already partially released, suggests shocking statistics. Albanians are 153 times more likely to be convicted of drug crimes, and Eritreans 20 times more likely to be convicted of sex offences than native Britons. For Reform and its voters, this amendment is not just policy, it's proof they can deliver meaningful change in Parliament. With Labour veering leftward and the Tories battling to define themselves, a new force is emerging, Advance UK. Founded by Ben Habib, a former Reform figure disillusioned by Farage's inconsistencies, Advance UK seeks to offer real ideological clarity, a return to sovereignty, tradition, and unapologetic national pride. Advance UK claims to represent not just a political alternative, but a moral one. It stands for one legal system, no foreign courts, no Sharia exceptions. It champions freedom of speech, family autonomy, and limited government. And it does so not as political theatre, but from principled conviction. His movement frames itself as a clean break from the past. It rejects the political elite's games and media theatrics. It calls for British law, British values, and British identity to be defended, clearly, unapologetically, and without compromise. Advance UK positions itself as the voice of those who once hoped Reform UK would blaze a trail, but were left disappointed. In this narrative, Reform became a brand, Advance UK wants to become a cause. The UK stands on the edge of a political transformation. Disillusionment with Labour and the Conservatives has opened the door to a new right-wing populism, once fringe, now mainstream. Whether it's through Farage's Reform UK or Habib's Advance UK, the appetite for change is real. But that change is fragile. Will it deliver solutions or deepen division? That remains to be seen. For now, one thing is certain: Britain's political consensus has shattered, and what comes next will define a generation.